Thank you so very much for joining us today. It's wonderful to see you all, and thank you to the participants that are joining in online. My name is Tera Jordan. I'm serving as the Assistant Provost for Faculty Development. I'm delighted to moderate this session on Faculty Reflections on the 2021 National Conference on Race and Ethnicity virtual meeting. We're going to begin with introductions and then talk a little bit about how we recruited faculty, some reflections, expectations, and then we'll have a panel discussion. Dr. Behnken. Monic Behnken, Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. And Gansemer-Topf, Associate Professor, School of Education, and the College of Human Sciences. Laura Jarboe, Cargill Professor in Chemical and Biological Engineering, and Sue Lamont, Dr. Lamont, Charles F. Curtis, Distinguished Professor, College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. Please join me in thanking them and greeting them with some applause for their participation today. So the Office of the Senior Vice President and Provost partnered with the Office of the Senior Vice President for Student Affairs to support a limited number of Iowa State faculty to attend the 2021 National Conference on Race and Ethnicity, their annual meeting, which was virtual because of the pandemic. We did so because there were some faculty reflections that really highlighted the utility of this experience. For example, I found it to be a wonderful growing experience, different than the regular conferences. It was wonderful. I learned so much in a short time. It was transformative. So there were some expectations for the 27 faculty participants. One, they were expected to attend one virtual group meeting before the conference, which featured panelists who described their NCORE experience. They selected a learning partner to support their NCORE engagement, and then they participated in NCORE. They were asked to check in with their learning partner daily and take part in one debriefing session where they reflected on the NCORE of their daily impact experience and set daily, if not future, goals. So now I'd like to open up with our panel discussion and share some questions for our panelists to reflect upon. So to begin, let's just have a little dialogue. Why did you attend NCORE 2021? What did you hope to gain? What were your conference expectations? What reservations or concerns did you have? And why did you make the time in the summer to attend?
Thanks very much, Tara, for those questions. I'll just address maybe the first one. It's why did I attend? And in addition to the benefits that I knew would accrue to myself, the conference was at the same time that my colleague Theresa Cooper and I were leading a summer fellowship program that was joint with our counterparts at North Carolina A&T University. And one of the named objectives in the USDA-sponsored program was that we would work on increasing cultural competency for all of our fellows. And so this opportunity of spending a week together, although it was virtually, with our fellows and their faculty mentors together attending and then having group discussions and debriefing sessions afterwards was just fantastic. It benefited all the faculty mentors involved. It greatly benefited the undergraduate students that were involved, that we could access the wonderful programming in NCORE and help us achieve one of our goals within that fellowship program is to increase the cultural competency for this leadership group that we were training.
I'll address maybe the first two. So why did I attend? I think a theme that, as I was reflecting on, is this idea that it was virtual, right? So that was a reason to attend because the timing in the past didn't work for me. So having it be virtual allowed me to not have to travel during that time. It also sort of, as I think about that virtual environment, some of the gains and some of the drawbacks. But for me, what I was hoping to gain is I had last spring been on a faculty development leave or sabbatical, and specifically in the past 2 years, I think in the pandemic with the George Floyd, I've been doing a lot more reading and sort of educating myself in terms of racism, and trying to, so I had the content and I was trying to think, okay, this information is knowable, but how do we do, what do we do with it? Like how do we interact? And so the opportunity to connect with others in, different institutions to find out, what's happening at Iowa State? What are we doing differently at Iowa State? Is this consistent? But then more importantly, how do we take that knowledge, right? I'm reading the content, and how do I begin to apply it? And so that's kind of what I was hoping to gain, as well as thinking, am I reading the right stuff? Am I having the right discussions?
So I will answer the last question, which is, why did you make time in the summer to attend? And that's a really interesting question. From my perspective as a faculty member, I don't get the summers off. I'm not paid over the summer, but I don't get the summers off, right? And actually, so I teach during the summer, so I'm usually always working. And from the faculty perspective, the summer is when you kind of get caught up on the work you're supposed to do that you don't have time to do during the semester. So the summer piece wasn't really what was meaningful for me. But what I will say is it's related to the fact that one of the things I've learned through my experiences in the community and through leadership opportunities is I'm actually never off. And people are always looking at you for leadership in a variety of ways, even when you think that they are not, and so I'm always mindful of the things that I'm doing or sharing opportunities that I'm engaging in, because it's meaningful. People are watching. And so when I transitioned into my new associate dean role, it was important for me to not only attend NCORE, but to let people know that I was doing it, because it will inspire other people to do it as well. And so that's why I made the time in the summer to do it.
So, I'll echo a lot of the sentiments of the other panelists. Why did I attend? I want to learn, right? I'm I would say very illiterate almost in terms of the language and the concepts associated with inclusion and diversity, even though those are things that are really important to me. I have so much to learn. What did I hope to gain? Just increased knowledge, ideas, really just to soak it all up. What were some of my concerns? I worried that, I'm going to say the wrong thing, and so much of just trying to keep up with some of the speakers, there were so many terms and almost like a coded language that was, I'm not well versed in, right? It was hard to keep up with what the meaning of what people were saying. So, worried that I'm not going to say the right thing, or I'm going to say the wrong thing. So that was a concern going in. I felt much more comfortable once the sessions got going. They were very welcoming. Why did I make the time to attend? Well, it was important, and as Ann said, the virtual aspect was actually quite appealing. It would be very hard for me to justify taking the time to travel to a conference and shut off everything else, all my other responsibilities, yes, even in the summer, in order to do that. So I was able to step away from the meeting to attend that reporting meeting with DARPA or whatever the other obligations were. And so I understand that we missed out on some of the aspects of the in-person component, but it would be really hard for me to go in person to justify that. So I was able to get some of the benefit of the virtual participation.
Next set of questions. I don't have the mic, so feel free to.
So yeah, I can talk about how I engage with my learning part. What? Read the questions, okay. What were a few key highlights of your conference experience? How did you engage with your learning partner? And how did you benefit from the conference? I can talk about my experience with my learning partner. It was someone that we started in these faculty positions at the same time, so we've been friends and colleagues for over 10 years. And so there was no judgment, right? We could both speak freely about what our concerns were and what we had learned. And then also it held us accountable for planning which sessions we were going to go to the next day. There wasn't that, I'm going to look at the agenda in the morning and figure it out. It was just, I'm going to pick today, what I'm going to do tomorrow, and I'm going to need to be able to explain why I chose those things and what do I hope to get out of those.
So my highlights were, so it's interesting. It was a virtual conference. You know, you see the little windows with people's names. It was neat seeing people in there that I knew. I was like, oh, there's so and so. So that was actually kind of neat. But you know, one of my key highlights were the keynotes. They had a variety of keynotes and speakers throughout the event, and I was like, wow. I mean, star-studded heavy hitter. So Kimberly Crenshaw was one of the speakers, and she's one of my personal heroes, one of my personal leadership heroes, and so I was like fangirling the whole time. And so I would never have had the opportunity, I don't think, to hear her speak public, in public like that. So that was amazing. Benjamin Crump. And so let me go back to Kimberly Crenshaw. She was speaking when these kind of divisive concepts laws were just coming out. And I remember something she said. She said, a lie goes around the world 15 times before the truth ever gets its boots on. Yeah, I remember that quote. It was such a meaningful moment to see her react to attacks on her work that were actually happening. And then Benjamin Crump spoke, and I think they had just finished the Derek Chauvin trial. And so, having access to the people who are making the news and making the moments that we're actually reflecting on was just a key takeaway for me. That was a really great experience.
Okay, is this working?
I mean, so all those wonderful comments no one heard.
Oh, no.
Just kidding.
And they were great comments too. They were great. Yeah, definitely agree. As each of the others has said, the keynotes were outstanding. But for me, there was one experience of the conference that really stays with me. And I'll have to mention first that although I have no talent in music, I have this deep emotional attachment to music. That's how music hits me, is emotionally. And one of the Native American elders who was being recognized for all of his work in the area shared with us some of his traditional music. And that, to me, I can still hear and see that in my mind. It touched me so deeply that first, that he shared that with us, and second, that he had accomplished so much in that area, and thirdly, that he was being honored and recognized for those contributions. But another thing that was really a highlight of the conference experience for me was the reaction of some of the students in the group that we took along. And particularly, I remember one of the students who identifies as white, who initially voiced some hesitation as to whether or not there would be benefit to her for participation in this program. And when it was over, we had some really good conversations, and she said, I am so glad. Now I understand why we were engaging in that. I feel that I am so much better prepared now to move forward in this space, and thank you for pushing us into there, even though it was a bit out of our comfort zone to start out with. So that for me was also a real highlight, the recognition by the student of the value of the participation. Okay, so our next set of questions, what did you take away from NCORE 2021? How have you implemented the information, strategies, or perspectives into your faculty position responsibilities? So, well, what I took away from it certainly was a greater understanding of life experiences which are different than the ones that I have lived. And that is always incredibly helpful for me. And that enabled me as a faculty member and a mentor, I think, to provide better mentorship to match what students need, to be able to serve better as a colleague and a person to help others, because I have a broader experience through hearing the stories of others that were unlike my own, and that gives me a richer picture of the world.
Oh, well, there are a lot. I think this sense of I know something, right? So like I've gone into sessions, I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm familiar with that, or oh, I understand that term. And a humility that there's a lot that I'm like, I hadn't thought of that, especially if I think about, you know, our land grant mission and the indigenous people and the relationships, and thinking about being proud of being at a land grant institution, and now thinking, really, what does that mean? And how do we sort of think through and promote and hold, you know, both of those kind of tensions? I think there is, you get frustrated with what's happening at your institution, and so it's both comforting and maybe a little overwhelming to think that there are lots of institutions in the same place, and then figuring out, okay, but what is anyone doing it well? And so some of those nuggets, again, like coalition building, community engagement, how do you use power and influence where you can? And I also think language, like every year, like there's something new about language, and you know, you talk about learning it new. It's like, well, in 5 years it might change, and that's not good or bad. That's just the context. And so, understanding the power of language. And the other takeaway, which I didn't expect, is watching how people handle difficult questions well and conflict well, because I'm not usually very good at it. And you know, when you talk about why are we having these conversations, and when people make a statement, I always go back to what's the purpose of the statement? Is it really just to poke? Is it to make change? Is it because you're angry? All of those are valid, but your response to that can change. And to watch people handle those conflicts, right? If I'm about educating individuals, my response, if that's the purpose, might be different than if I'm like, I've had it, I'm moving on, right? And sometimes that is, obviously those responses are all valid, but watching others negotiate that, and even when we were preparing for this panel, you know, there was a conversation that Monique did this thing. So what tone are we trying to, and I was like, wow, that is good. That is a good question, you know? And so you learn, because this is what the difficulty is, right? It's virtual. There were lots of discussions we couldn't have, But when people do that, and online, the chat, like how people were engaging in chat or not. So the takeaway for me is nothing that I can really say it's tangible, but just watching, like when you see it happen, you're like, wow. Like the simple question, when someone says something and you're like, tell me more. That simple phrase can sort of get people to step back and go, okay, what tone was I trying to set? So I think for me, the takeaways, it was the content, but it's watching people in the act of engaging in that. And I think for me, that's why the virtual experience, I knew it could be so much richer, because it is so much richer when you're one-on-one with individuals or you see people in the hall or whatever. So, and I can talk a little bit about what have you done since that, because that's the key thing, but I'll hold off on that and turn it over to my colleagues.
Yeah, I echo that. I think seeing people in the space and how people engage was also something that was meaningful for me. So I took away a couple things. I took away understanding that, my journey with all of this stuff has primarily been personal. It's been because I'm curious or I'm interested or I'm learning and I'm growing and I want to read this book and whatever. But now this is my job. It's my technical job now. And so I need to not only be better for me, but I need to put myself in a position to be able to help a variety of other people who are at different points in their journey. And so I attended NCORE not only for my own personal development, but also for my professional development for that reason. And kind of being in that space with that duality was a new experience for me. And I realized that it was actually really good because that's what I need to be doing, right? So I have to be going to these kinds of conferences, not because it's something that I think I need or is something that I need, but also understanding, okay, how can I use this as a tool for other people that I'm in collaboration with? The other thing that I took away was a tremendous host of resources. So I'm one of those people who has like 1,000 tabs open on their computer, and like my bookmarks is like 8,000 bookmarks in it. And so what I took away was all the resources, all the links. I went, I saved all the websites of the presenters. And so because there were people who were at different stages in the journey, I was able to save resources from people who were very far, I will say more advanced or farther ahead than we are, right? And so those are references for me to say, okay, I can take this piece or this will work here or whatever it is. So having that was really good. And then the other thing is a tool belt, because the way that I operate, I'm a big fan of evidence-based practices. I want to know what is the model, what's been published. And so for me, I think one of the most useful things I took away was I attended a session on diversifying the faculty, which you hear all the time. Everybody talks about that. Nobody knows how to do that. Nobody has any idea how to do that. But there are actually evidence-based models around how to do that. And I was like, I'll just put that in my pocket. And then in terms of the next question, those things are all related, because as I implement this new role in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, as I'm building a foundation, I've used these resources. I've benefited from people who've already done the work, right? There's no reason to reinvent the wheel or, do things the hard way. If these are good resources, then let's go ahead and use those. And, especially around the hiring, because that's a conversation we've been having. And so every time hiring comes up, I say, well, now if we're really serious, we have to do this 2-year phase. We can't just keep putting apps out, right? Like there's a way to do it. And so, figuring out that you kind of have to chip away at that rock, right? But knowing that when we're there and we're ready, I've got an evidence-based practice that will get us there. So that's probably the most important thing I've been able to implement.
So to second some of the other previous comments, Anne mentioned the difficult conversations, and I recognize that this is part of white culture, right? But this fear of conflict and this absolute, I don't want to participate in any hard discussions. I don't want to even be there. But there, in one of the sessions I was in, somebody had made some comments in the chat. Things kind of blew up. They got that person to come back, which, okay, I appreciate that he was willing to come back and engage in discussion instead of just staying away. But seeing how the session moderators handled that difficult discussion with this person who was, had the defensive walls up, right, and trying to, well, anyway, it was uncomfortable, but I appreciated seeing that, play out. What have I implemented in response? Just kind of touching on that, if it's almost like a failure, right? So I teach the sophomore level chemical engineering course, material and energy balances, and this past semester I had one assignment where they needed to either take an implicit bias test or read this report. It was up to them. And they didn't need to tell me which test they took or what the results were, just that they took it. And some students still felt compelled to argue with, this is the test I took and these are the results I got and this is why they're not true. And me being kind of on the fence, like, do I say anything, right, in response to this student? And so I generally didn't, right? I felt like it was overstepping to some degree, but being a little more comfortable with the thought of maybe doing that, even though I didn't do it. I don't know if that's a success or not, but yeah.
Actually, I thought of one other thing that I really took away from this conference, and that was how different it is than the typical disciplinary conferences that I go to. Those I can, take my notes and bring those notes home and look at them at some future time, and that's sufficient. And that was not sufficient for this conference. It was absolutely essential that we had built in both the accountability, of checking in with our partners, checking in with our group to process, because a lot of those topics are really tough. And, at the end of the day, my mind, my emotions were still rolling. They were very active, and I really needed to be working with partners and others to continue that at a time when it was really fresh, and that was an important part because every one of us, as we participated, had different experiences, different reactions, and then sharing those later was just an absolutely essential part of the NCORE experience for me.
And I'll try to be accountable to what I have done. So I would say, and the other highlight I forgot too is I've worked primarily with grad students, but I study college student success. So the other highlight was to hear from undergrad students about what their experiences were. And I think in terms of what I've done, I didn't realize at the time, but I am now director of grad education. And so thinking through, like, what are the processes, policies for students, for specifically our racially minoritized students? What are the obstacles? What conversations can I be engaged with? How do we sort of unpack the process? Now as an associate professor for my colleagues, again, and this is why I say racially minoritized, faculty of color, our Black faculty, all of the languages, but trying to figure out, like, what are the obstacles built in with the School of Ed and the college and the university that we can sort of minimize, if at all. And then how do you do that, right? And understanding that a lot of that work is hidden work and may never be realized, but it's work nonetheless. The accountability thing is, I remember after NCORE, we're like, we need to do X, Y, and Z as a group. And that didn't happen, right? And so there is some sort of, yeah, we said we would do this and we didn't. So me thinking, well, why aren't we? And everyone, it's time. Well, if it's important work, you should make the time. And so I'll just be real. It's like all these great ideas. There are things I'm doing on the macro level or micro level. Yeah, and I'll stop there. What arrangements did you make to facilitate your involvement? What would make it easier for you to be engaged and participate? Well, I mean, online virtual made it sort of easy in some ways, but it also made it difficult to really engage. And I see that, like, even in the classes, like, you could have an online class, but when you're in person, those conversations happen during breaks or between, sessions, and those things didn't happen. Or walking, I will see my Iowa State colleagues on the chat, but I wasn't having conversations with them. And so I think that was a little bit difficult. So I think a lot of, if we talk about participating in NCORE, please know that much of this experience, the context of that virtual environment and piece, really, for me, impacted it.
So in terms of what arrangements I made none, and that was a mistake. So I was like, oh, it's a virtual conference. I'll just be around. And that was a horrible mistake. So, because, it was summer. So my husband's home, my kids are home, my dog is home. They don't care that I'm in a conference for a week. They don't care that, and it starts at like 8 and goes till 6. They didn't care, and I'm like, could y'all be quiet? I'm in a conference. They're like, no, you're not, Mom, so that whole thing is I did not make enough plans. And for me, I actually think attending the conference in person would alleviate that for me. I don't know if virtual, it's easier but harder in some ways. So that's something I could work on. And in terms of what would make it easier for you to be engaged and participate, one of the things that I learned in attending this with kind of an administrator hat on is, okay, what can I do, right? And so I think a couple things is that I understood that giving people more notice would be something that helped them engage, and frankly, paying for it. I believe that, you had partners who helped pay for this. There was still a cost, even though it was virtual, and the in-person is, so the thing is, you hear about NCORE on campus, and it lives in these, they say, oh, the experience is transformative. Oh, it's so meaningful, right? But they also say, oh, but it's really expensive. And so you're like, what does that mean? Ain't nobody got no money. We even know what this is. It's the summer, our professional development's already gone. And so in my mind, that was always a barrier. Whether it really is or not, I never looked it up. But in my mind, I was like, oh, expensive. Well, we ain't got no money in sociology. So I feel like that being in an administrative position, whatever I can do to make it financially feasible for people to attend is something that I can do. And so if you are someone in one of those positions who has that kind of budget or opportunity, I think that's something you could do to help.
So yeah, it was helpful that it was virtual, and I did move some meetings around and kept others. But in terms of just the barrier to be engaged and participate, I think this is part of a larger issue with diversity and inclusion type issues of, I've got a lot of responsibilities. We all have a lot of responsibilities, right? I've got various research projects. I've got manuscripts to write. And how do I justify setting those aside to do this thing that I think is very important, right, when it's not necessarily viewed, it doesn't necessarily show up on my CV, right? And it's not just about what's on my CV, right? I want to be a better person and I want to help others, right? But there's also that I've got this deadline for this proposal and I have to give this presentation, and where does this fit? I want to do this. I think it makes me be a better professor, better scientific community member, but it doesn't count, right, necessarily on the things that I did this summer and things I did to advance my career and help my department and my college and my university be a better place. So I don't know where that fits, but that was one session I attended where they talked about how to give faculty credit and help them justify spending the time doing this sort of thing.
But I also think I just want to comment on that, right? It's this either or, right? I focus on, being inclusive, anti-racist, or I write something else. And I think that narrative is problematic, and it's real. But yes, faculty is something we have to contend with and push back against. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Another concern here, right, is already, it's recognized that people who are in the underrepresented groups get called on to do more of the diversity-related service, right? And I just want to acknowledge there were men who were sponsored to go to ISCORE too, right? And you look at who's up here, right? And whether that's statistically significant, I don't know, right? Sponsored to go to NCORE, not ISCORE. But there's always the concern, like if I'm the person who's making the effort to do these trainings and learn these things, then I become the diversity faculty person, right, who gets asked to do all these things related to diversity and inclusion, which I'm glad to do them, right, but am I getting the disproportional load because, well, you're the one who knows about all this, you're the one who cares. So that's always in the back of my mind, yeah.
So what I've started saying to people is I've started challenging that, because I think that's true, and I think it's what we think as academics, but I think it's also what we're told. it's not like we just made it up, right? But what I tell people is, so I've had people say, well, I really want to go to this training, but I can't because I got to go work on the budget. Or I really want to go to this training, but I can't because I got to do X, Y, and Z. And what I say is, well, if you aren't up to date and literate around these issues, then whatever it is you're doing, you're not doing well. So, it's to your benefit to be sure that you are serving students well. So I've got to prepare this lecture well. Is it going to go well for everybody who doesn't look like you, right? In terms of the budget. Well, yeah, you put some numbers on paper, but is it really helping the long-term goals of the institution, right? And so I think part of what I hope we can do is really change that narrative. Like, we're not doing this just because, it's benevolence and we want to be better people. We actually want to be really good at what we're doing. And if we really want to be good at serving students, we actually have to be doing this, right? Of all the things that we do, there's tons of stuff we do that we don't want to do. But there's some things you do because it just helps you be better at your job. And I hope we can start that narrative that attending NCORE and ISCORE are things that will help you be better at your job. Well, let's see what these glasses say. Okay. What is a takeaway from NCORE 2021? Would you recommend NCORE 2022 to a colleague? Why or why not? And who do I contact about the NCORE 2022 experience? So, my takeaway is that it was an incredible investment of my time. Personally and professionally, I will say that. I go to a lot of workshops, and most of them are awful, but this was a good one. It was good. There was good quality, a lot of depth. So I was glad that I invested not only personally, but also professionally. Yes, I would definitely recommend NCORE 2022 to a colleague. I would recommend NCORE 2022 to a college, actually, LAS. So because, like to your point, we all have to do this work. And we're all at different points, and we can't just be looking at people who are already holding 1, 2, or 3 marginalized identities to be pulling everybody along, right? So, the colleges, I'm not going to pick on anybody, but, sometimes the departments, they look at what we're doing. We're doing all this stuff, and then it's one person who's doing all this stuff, right? It's like, actually, y'all not doing nothing. This person is doing something, right? And so I think that's one of the things that we have to do is we have to bring more people along because this is all of our work. And then who do I contact about NCORE? So I would just reach out to, I know I was going to say Dr. Jordan, but she's going to say, don't put this on my plate. Right? But Japana, of course, is the person that I think of when I have a question about NCORE.
What was a takeaway? I can't point to any one specific thing that I learned, but just an expansion of my circle of knowledge of some of the issues and things that I can do to help improve diversity and inclusion. Would I recommend it? Absolutely. Why or why not? I would recommend it because I thought it was helpful. I learned new things. And I do not know who to contact about. Yeah, go to the website or something. I don't know. Yeah. Okay.
I think I said a lot about my takeaways. I think as well as the takeaway, I'll just own it. As faculty, we're not comfortable when we don't know something. And so I think that makes NCORE even more important because it can be a space where you can say, I don't know, or I really screwed this up, or I still don't get it. And so for that perspective, now as we heard that Anita earlier had said, it is our responsibility to know and to understand and to be better. But it can be a place to do that because we're not good. Faculty are good at giving feedback when it's mass review and no one knows who we are, but it's hard to engage in those discussions. And so for that fact only, I think NCORE is a valuable experience.
Yeah, so one of the major takeaways for me is that this is a conference of value for persons of all identities. And everybody gained something from that. I gained really a deeper understanding of the privilege that I experience on an everyday basis. Even though in agriculture, when I started on the faculty, I was quite a minority in terms of gender. I realized that when I walked into the community, I was then the majority race. And so I didn't have to carry the wearisome identity in every part of my everyday life. And through hearing the stories, it brought me to a much greater understanding of persons for whom life is setting up more struggles than I ever have to deal with. And that is part of everyday life for them. And for me to be able to hear it and process it, to get some practical suggestions of, well, how can you be a better ally in those situations? That was really beneficial takeaways for me within the conference.
Please join me in thanking our faculty participants today for their honesty and transparency. I also want to thank Dr. Toya Younger. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for your partnership in this effort, and thank you for your leadership at this institution. I also want to thank my colleagues in the Provost office that are online, Senior Vice President and Provost Jonathan Wickard and Associate Provost for Faculty Don Brecht Prince for their collaboration, support, and vote of confidence in me each and every day in the Provost office. I was privileged to attend NCORE 2020, was it 2019? 2019 in Portland, and it was a transformative experience. It really was, and I will agree with my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Behnken, that we attend many sessions and we don't always walk away with something. And that week shook me up in a way that I had never really experienced professionally or personally, in a positive way. And as I looked around at that large delegation from Iowa State, I said, where are my faculty colleagues? We talk about the leadership that we have at the university, always wanting to engage and participate in shared governance, and we recognize the influence that we have. And here's this pivotal conference on issues of race and ethnicity with folks from all around the world in higher education, and I could probably count on one hand the number of faculty colleagues that were there. And so then to be appointed in the provost office, have an opportunity to talk with Japana, Kellogg, and then at the time Joelle Mitchell at the table in Bearcher Hall, was really an incredible opportunity to see what it is we could do to ensure other faculty who are willing to participate in the experience to take part in NCORE and perhaps raise their awareness, add tools to their tool belt for an ever-changing context in higher education. And then who could have imagined a pandemic? And I would say the pandemic afforded us the opportunity to lengthen to create an experience where 27 faculty participants could go, because we did not have travel expenses associated with it. As you heard from some of our faculty panelists, they would not have been able to travel, even with travel support. And so I think the meaning of that, talk about making lemonade from lemons. I mean, really. And so I really want to thank them for opening themselves to the experience, truly. And we do better with things that we are sharp and do know a lot about, yeah. But to be the student in the classroom around areas that were really perhaps potentially very emotionally charged, that's true, and maybe even uncomfortable, to better equip yourself and at a minimum raise your awareness, I think is critically important. It speaks to your leadership as faculty members on this campus. What's that? Well, thank you. I appreciate that. As far as NCORE 2022, let's put a pin in that. And we are in touch with our colleagues in student affairs. They asked for a little time to get past ISCORE. I received that. But also, for those faculty who are interested, you really should be collaborating with the NCORE ISCORE office, because we get a pretty good group discount. And you'll need your Iowa State t-shirt and things like that. So you really should be in communication with the NCORE ISCORE office in order to make them aware of your participation in the NCORE meeting. And so give us a little time to be in contact with our colleagues and then see what it is that we can make available for potentially an NCORE 22 experience. So we have just a little under 5 minutes. I'd be happy to answer any questions from our participants today. And the chat is going crazy. I missed all of that. Oh my goodness, because I was standing online. Lots of, huh? I can say the chat for you. The speakers at the national meeting are absolutely amazing. Is someone talking? Okay. They corrected the mic. Okay. They got the audio corrected. We will work on seeing if Angie T would be willing to write down their thoughts to that question, okay? If you're interested, the NCORE email is iscore@iastate.edu. Thank you for this wonderful panel and wonderful listening to the experiences of others that attended the conference. Though that's what's in the chat. Do you want to paraphrase? Do you remember what you were sharing before? Okay. My goodness.
I'll follow up. I don't know which question it was. So
Hopefully when you go back and watch the video, it'll like.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. Very good. Wonderful. Are there any questions from the audience or comments or any final comments from our faculty participants in the last 3 minutes we have? Yes, Dr. Shaw.
I would just tell everybody, please go in person. It is life-changing. I'm planning on going for 2022, so I would love more people to be able to go. But the virtual experience is great, but the in-person.
Right. So I will repeat that for our audience. This was Dr. Angela Shaw in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. Dr. Shaw was my buddy in NCORE 2020. Was it 2019? There was a lot happening in my life then, not NCORE 2019. And even though we are colleagues as Black women faculty on this campus, I connected with you in a different dimension at that meeting. That I do remember. And so she emphasized the importance of attending in person if you can, to get the full experience of attending the NCORE meeting. And I will tell you, nobody does it like Iowa State at NCORE. When you see all those folks coming together, I mean, it's like 100 folks. And I remember that feeling of, they think we're about to do a flash mob or sing a song or something. But no, we're about to take a picture in solidarity of having such a large delegation there. So she talked about, for those that are online, the importance of attending in person and what a meaningful and transformative experience it is to be there in solidarity with others from around the nation and around the world, talking about critical issues around race and ethnicity. Yes? That's above my pay grade. Okay, Senior Vice President and Provost, Senior Vice President for Student Affairs, how about if you take that one? The question is for the audience online, and I'll go ahead and bring you the mic. The funding for faculty, staff, students, and others, is that from one budget, or how does that work? Which pot of money supports that? There you go, Dr. Younger.
As soon as she asked the question about the money, I said, watch this, Angela, I'm going to slide under the table. So nobody, and she's like, here's the mic. Here's the mic. Actually, it comes from multiple sources. This is something that is very important to university leadership. We specifically in student affairs contribute a significant amount, particularly for our students, because we want them to. And then in partnership with the provost's office and the president's office, who's aware. As Dr. Jordan mentioned, we have always been known to have a large contingent group. And so I am excited that it is back in person. I haven't been to ISCORE. I'm at ISCORE now. I haven't been to NCORE in at least 5+ years. Every time I had gone in the past, it was life-changing. It was the candidness, the openness. It's something that you have to experience. It's one of those once in a lifetime moments. And so we want to make sure that we can send as many people as possible. And so that's why we're kind of putting the pause, because we know after ISCORE, we're going to have 1 million people coming up saying, I want to go now. And so we want to plan and be mindful of that. But there is funding at the university leadership level.
Thank you all so very much.
If I could throw in one last idea. So like on the one hand, like, yes, I want to have a life-changing experience, but on the other hand, I don't want that, right? Like the thought of like getting all fired up about, yes, we need to make this happen. And like, my life's already hard, right? And so I just want to acknowledge like that fear of having that transformative experience rather than I'm going to change incrementally. Yeah.
We're all right there with you. Yes, indeed. Thank you all so very much for your time.
Thank you.